Welcome to the Theology Made podcast. I'm Dr. Jordan Vale. In today's episode, we're going to look at how nobody knows what Jesus looked like. Jesus. Just by saying his name, an image of him showed up in your head. Long hair, somewhere between brown and dark blonde, a trim beard, always trimmed, a calm face lit from the side, the eyes turned slightly up towards something off camera. Maybe he has a white robe, maybe he's carrying a cross. And whatever just appeared in your head is not his actual face. It can't be. Nobody wrote down what Jesus looked like, and nobody who knew him left us a picture. Which, come to think of it, is a bit strange. The Gospels are full of small, oddly specific details. They tell you the name of the man whose ear got cut off, the number of fish in a net, the color of the sky, and then there's that one story in the book of Mark of the guy who fled naked. And yet, not one of the four writers tells the shape of Jesus' face, the color of his hair, whether he was tall or short, striking or forgettable. The men who walked beside him for 3 years describe nearly everything, except the one thing every artist since has had to guess at. The face you pray to is a face somebody painted. The only question is who and when and why they made him look the way they did. Let's go to the beginning. The Old Testament has exactly one line that anyone reads as a description of the Messiah's appearance. It's found in the book of Isaiah. It says he had no form or majesty that we should look at him. Nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. That's not a description of a beautiful man. It's a shrug. Meh. There was nothing about how he looked worth writing down. And when we come to the New Testament, the gospel writers seem to have agreed. They had every chance to fix his image for all time, and they spent their words on what he said and what he did instead. For the people closest to the person, the face was simply not something that mattered. And the earliest Christians, they went a step further. They made no images of him at all for a long time. And it's not an accident or a lack of skill. They had inherited a deep suspicion of religious images straight out of the Ten Commandments, which warned against carving anything to bow down to. A movement born inside of Judaism did not rush to paint its Lord. For the first couple of centuries, Christianity was a faith you heard and you joined. It wasn't one you looked at. But then something happened, sometime in the early 200s. In a battered town called Dora Europos, on the eastern edge of the Roman Empire, Christians did something new. They met in a converted house, and on its walls, they painted scenes from the Gospels. A man healing a paralytic, a figure carrying a sheep across his shoulders. And these are some of the oldest surviving pictures of Jesus we have. And they're barely older than the church that made them. Yet, the people who painted them had no face to copy. There wasn't a portrait passed down, there was no description to work from, so they pulled from what they had, which were the images already hanging in the world around them. The shepherd carrying the sheep was a pose Romans had been carving for centuries on pagan tombs, a stock symbol of care and rescue. When Christians in the Roman catacombs began painting Jesus a little later, they often made him a beardless young man with soft features and curly hair, and he came out looking like Apollo, or like Orpheus, or like the young sun god people already knew how to draw. The first Christian artists, they didn't invent a look for Jesus, they just borrowed what was around them, which means from the very first brushstroke, Jesus looked like whoever was holding the brush. And the familiar version, the bearded man with long hair parted down the middle, that came later. By the time the empire turned Christian, churches grew large and golden. That grave, bearded, long-haired type had taken over. And it carried with it an air of authority, a regality, borrowed from how artists drew the gods and philosophers. A famous icon at the monastery on Mount Sinai, painted around the 500s, already showed the face most of us would recognize today. Jump forward to 1940, to a commercial artist in Chicago named Warner Salmon. He painted a soft, glowing head of Christ with flowing light brown hair and gentle European features, and it was printed onto prayer cards and Sunday school walls and funeral programs by the hundreds of millions. Some estimates put it past 500 million copies. And if you grew up in an American church, that painting, more than any sermon or any verse, is probably why you picture Jesus the way you do. The single most influential image of Jesus in the modern world was made by an advertising man in the 20th century. And it showed a fair-skinned Northern European, which tells you a great deal about Chicago in 1940, and almost nothing about a man from first century Galilee. because we actually have a fairly good idea of what that man would have looked like, and it wasn't that. A team led by a medical artist reconstructed the likely face of a Galilean Jew from the period, working from skulls found in the region and from what we know about the people who lived there. The result was a man with brown skin, dark eyes, short dark hair, and a short beard. His skin weathered from years of outdoor work. By the average build of Galilean men at the time, he was probably around 5 feet tall and lean. He would have blended into a crowd in his own village without anyone turning a head. And that last point, that's the whole point from Isaiah. The absence of his face was never a hole in the record of Christianity. Because on one side, it kept his followers from doing the very thing they had been warned against, freezing God into an object you could hang on a wall and worship. You cannot turn a face into an idol when nobody knows the face. And on the other side, it set him loose. Because there was no official portrait, every culture that received him got to picture him as one of its own. Ethiopian Christians painted him with their features, Korean Christians with theirs, European painters with theirs. He became, visually, whatever people needed him to be in order to feel like he belonged to them. And I do think there is something beautiful in that, because a face nobody preserved becomes a face everyone could share. But that same door can also swing shut. A face you are free to imagine is a face you are free to bend. When generations of Western Christians, like myself, grew up with a pale, gentle, European Jesus that doesn't necessarily stay neutral. It taught people that holiness looked like them and like the people in charge, and that image has been used in some very ugly ways and causes over the past few centuries. Because the moment you get to decide what Jesus looked like, you begin to decide who he came for. Show me the Jesus in your imagination, and I can probably guess where you grew up, who taught you, and what the people you trusted look like. The face in your head is real. It just isn't his. It's a composite you assembled without meaning to out of a painting in a relative's hallway, a felt board in the Sunday school room, an actor in a film you saw. Thanks, Jim Caviezel. It is yours, and it says more about you than about a carpenter from Nazareth who left no portrait behind. The early Christians, they could have hired someone to capture his likeness while the witnesses were still alive, and they did not. They let the face go and kept the words, perhaps on purpose, because the second you nail down exactly what he looked like, you start deciding whose side he's on. So the honest answer to what did Jesus look like is that we don't know, and the people who could have told us chose not to. Thanks for listening to the Theology Made podcast. If you were encouraged or found this interesting or helpful, please like and subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on.